How you guys doing? And welcome to the Game Ready podcast. I may mention that again. It's fantasy draft football season, and right now, all across the country, you got amateur GMs agonizing on their fantasy football draft rosters, chasing after the flashiest names, the guys who have put up monster numbers over the last like several seasons, and a lot of them are going to make the same mistake that they make every year, and they try to remedy that in some ways, but they don't look at one thing. We're going to talk about that later. I'm Coach E. Allen, and this is the Game Ready podcast on the Sideline Sports Network. I am a former professional athlete and college football player, and I'm here to just try to educate everyone that I can about how they can use certain sports stories to apply them to their everyday life. And as the founder of Atlas Performance Training here in Orlando, Florida, I see a lot of different things that I apply to my everyday practice to help people move better, live better, and just do things that they want to do. You can join me every Tuesday night here on the Sideline Sports Network. And one thing this podcast is about, it's about helping people understand how to use their body. So we're going to jump into tonight's episode. We're going to use a popular game that everybody is playing, this month. I tried it before. It's fantasy football. I really didn't care for it because I'm a defensive player, and most fantasy football leagues, they do not. They don't go into defense. So we're going to teach something that matters way beyond the game of football, which is the player's availability. This is one of the most underrated, unlooked aspects of drafting players, especially on the fantasy football leagues. I'm going to mention one name. The guy's name is Tyreek Hill. He was considered one of the fastest, most explosive, skilled players the game has ever seen over the last 10 years. And as I'm talking to you right now tonight, he's coming off a catastrophic knee injury, and he's currently unsigned. And the real question is whether he'll play a single down this season, and if he'll even find a team that is willing to take a chance and sign him, at his age and his level of injury he's had. And in this term, what we're talking about tonight, which means he won't be available, one of the most explosive players for the fantasy football draft, obviously. That's the whole episode tonight. And because your fantasy season won't be won in the draft room. If your fantasy season, your fantasy season will be won with a bit of luck, and most importantly, the availability of your players. Everybody tries to draft talent, but the champions in any draft, any fantasy league, they draft players according to availability, and they do some research behind those players, and they're the most prepared to make the best decision. Because an old coach told me a long time ago, and it's a phrase, and it's not a cliche, the best ability a player can have is their availability. And it's one of the strategies that I want to talk to you guys tonight. If you are joining a fantasy football league, and I'm going to show you how to use a simple system. Let's get into it. As we get into everything tonight, we're going to talk about several different factors that go into this, but we're going to start about the math behind these picks, because it's probably one of the most simple elements to draft these players by. And the value of any player that you draft is not just how good he is or how explosive he is. It's how good he is at times when the numbers, it's how good he is and the time and the number of games he actually plays to put up some great numbers. Points per game multiplied. The simple equation is points per game multiplied by by availability. A player who scores 20 points a game but only suits up 10 times during the year will give you 200 points. But a steady player, the available guy who gives you 14 games, or now 17 games, gives you 14 games, for during a 17-game season, will give you 238 points. That's he's probably explosive, probably exciting, but in a lot of ways he would be considered at this point in the season, he's the boring, healthy guy, and in general terms, he can beat that superstar just because he showed up and he's on the field. That's one thing that wins in all fantasy leagues that nobody wants to hear about. It's not the best player who can help you on the field. It's the best player who can avoid the training room. And most championship rosters in fantasy leagues are not the superstars in September. It's the team that is still standing in December with available players who put up consistent numbers, and they're available. And that availability compounds every week that your player is active and the other stud is hurt and in the training room. That actual gap that gap between the two grows within the fantasy football season. And over the season, that could be an enormous point shift for you. So the real skill is to draft, not just spotting talent. Everybody can see talent. Everybody can judge talent for the most part. Some people are not as astute as others. But any smart amateur GM in any fantasy league knows which injuries are bad luck and which ones are a pattern that could possibly be repeated during that year, where they won't have that player available on Sunday morning when they're ready to activate their players for the fantasy league day. So I'm going to give you the board I would draft from, as far from a durability standpoint, and these players have a history of injury, but these injuries vary of degrees of severity. Some of them are freak accidents, but they're all pretty much could be considered red flags. And we're going to start with red flag number 1, the high mileage running back. And over the last several years, this has been a major issue, really over the last 20 years. And really, I think probably like in the mid 2000, like around 2019, between 2019 and 2021, nobody really wanted to even draft a draft pick high due to the fact of durability issues. If you look at the running back that played for the Dallas Cowboys, that was Ohio State running back. I think his name was Zeke. I'm not sure. His name escapes me right now. And he had some durability issues. He was a first-round draft pick out of Ohio State. Over the last several years, running backs have actually rebounded, and running backs are pretty highly touted right now. This first high-profile running back is probably one of the most durable, but he has a history of injuries that have accumulated over the years. And with every touch and every carry, every hit, it adds up, and it doesn't always reset. And the name that I'm going to talk about is Christian McCaffrey. He's a dynamic, very, very explosive player, and he makes the offense run for the 49ers. And I want to be fair, because this is one that is kind of nuanced. Last season, Christian had a number of injuries, but he had a phenomenal season. He led the entire NFL in touches with more than 400 of them, and he finished as a top 10 scoring fantasy player in the in most fantasy leagues. Anyone who drafted him, they were rewarded heavily, but here's how the trap can kind of get you. He's considered like almost 70 years old in football terms. He's 30 years old. So I'm kind of joking. But he's missed over 50 games in his career. He just had 2 years. He just 2 years ago had Achilles injury and a knee injury that wiped out most of his entire season when he first, I believe, got to the 49ers when he got traded from the Carolina Panthers. He just put on 430 touches, and that is all first mileage that at a body his age could lead to some decline in his performance. The injury models that rate him as one of the most riskiest backs in most fantasy leagues, and that's a pretty high mileage trap. But the production is real, but every touch that he has, it withdraws from his overall availability account, and that account doesn't always refill. I wish the best for him. I think Christian McCaffrey is probably one of the most durable backs out there, and he's really, I liked his dad when he played for the Broncos. He was one of the most dynamic receivers out there, and very productive. Second red flag and second player we're going to talk to is about the reoccurring soft tissue player that injures soft tissue. And in this second profile, this is probably one of the most important ones to understand. And the issue of reoccurring soft tissue injuries, like in the hamstrings, quads, calves, and the groin, it's a true issue. And one of the sports rules, and one of the rules in sports science says, pretty crystal clear. The best single predictor of a soft tissue injury is a previous soft tissue injury. And once the hamstring goes, it can become a chronic issue, and that same hamstring, will only take you as far as you can go. And the hamstring injury can more likely happen again. And, as I said, it can become a chronic issue and a pattern that is not just an accident. And one of the players who've had this constant pattern is future Hall of Famer Mike Evans. And here in Florida, he's like one of the most, one of the most popular receivers over the last 15 years that have played in any sports team, on any football team here in the state of Florida, any professional football team, I should say. I remember when he played at Texas A&M with Johnny Manziel. He was a freak of nature, and if you ever look at Mike Evans, he has a great story behind where he actually came from and the adversity he had to actually get through to get to where he's at today. It's a phenomenal story. So look him up. As you can see, I really like Mike Evans. He's one of the toughest players. He's one of the toughest players of this generation, and he's dealt with a lot of hamstring and quad injuries in essentially every season of his career. But when he's on the field, he's a lethal weapon. His talent is never in question. His calf and hamstring seem to have been an issue every year, though, and it seems to be like clockwork. And you can look at it from an aspect. If you're a fantasy football player and who one of the biggest names is, the name is J.K. Dobbins. He's enormously talented and linked to soft tissue injuries. And the word that basically came with his name was pretty much synonymous with soft tissue injuries. His name he wasn't a GM. He's J.K. Dobbins. J.K. Dobbins is a player. I'm sorry about that. And it's the same kind of injury that keeps happening over and over and over again to him. And what the body is trying to tell you is pretty much you're doing something wrong, and to believe it. And if you keep doing what you're going to do, it's possibly going to fail on you. Soft tissue injuries, and they heal in pretty much in my opinion, I say in God's time. Soft tissue injuries are unpredictable. Structural injuries like a broken leg, sometimes a torn ligament, which is still soft tissue, but it's a lot more durable than a muscle. They heal a lot more effectively. Soft tissue, if you don't get the correct treatment, you don't get the correct plan in place to manage these injuries, it can become a recurring injury, and it can really hamper you and set you back long term. The third red flag is the ever so popular major knee ACL injury. But pretty much some people make a mistake that everyone makes. They see the word cleared and they consider that player, back to normal. Some people do. And some people look at it like this: the player has to prove it to me over several games, and that normal cleared tag is really, it's not a clear picture of what point this player is in the healing process. And because when an athlete tears an ACL, the last thing to return after they run. And the last thing to return after they tear an ACL is their ability to run, cut, and maneuver and do the things that they were used to doing before the injury even happened. And explosive power is the last thing that returns, which we covered in a previous podcast. That change in explosive power can lead to a loss of that burst and their ability to stretch defenses, to break a 20-yard run, and to be a dynamic player. Change, it can affect the change of direction at full speed. And for a wide receiver like Mike Evans, who I believe he tore his ACL, or a running back like Saquon Barkley, who tore his ACL, that burst is their whole job. That's why the first year back from an ACL is so often disappointing. But in Saquon Barkley's case, he was probably he was a comeback player of the year. I think he tore his ACL the previous year before he left New York, and then he went to Philadelphia and went nuts. So he's one of the outliers in my opinion. One of the players that we're going to mention next, he plays for the Giants. We're going to take a look at Malik Nabers, and we talked about Malik two or three episodes ago. He's considered one of the rising superstars in the NFC East. He tore his ACL last season, then needed a second procedure to clean out the scar tissue within that repair, and he's reportedly behind schedule. But nobody really knows. The talent is not really the question in his regard, but the question is his explosiveness back, and will this season be his breakout season that he needs in order for the Giants to be productive? And with his quarterback, they're really dependent on him to be the number one. We're going to talk about one of the best quarterbacks ever, in most people's opinion, Patrick Mahomes. He's rehabbing his knee after his left knee was injured last year in the playoffs. I think a week before the playoffs, and he may be ahead of schedule. We covered him a couple weeks ago, but if you notice, and like I mentioned before in previous episodes, the team is planning to protect him by running the pocket more, keeping him protected in the pocket, and running the ball a lot more effectively with the signing of the running back from the Seattle Seahawks. The next one is George Kittle, one of the best tight ends alive. He's kind of undersized. I didn't know he was as small as he is, but he's extremely effective. He's coming off a torn Achilles injury. He's sitting on he's sitting on the pup list for right now, but while his team brings him back slowly, um, he's coming along pretty well, and I'm hoping he has a full recovery. Achilles tears are probably one of the most gruesome um, injuries that you can actually experience. All these players that talked about so far, I would actually put them on my draft because I would put them on my fantasy roster. I should say within the fantasy draft due to the fact their injury, the the the, the nature of their injury, and how their injury is actually healing. Um, I think that they'll be all right. Malik Neighbors, he has the one that has a huge question mark behind by his name. Now we're going to talk about the players who have a pattern of bad luck, and you know it seems like I may have talked about Mike Evans in that fact in that scenario, but Mike Evans is not. He's not in this uh, bad luck section, or if you want to say that. He's one of the players who's durable because he's probably one of the toughest guys that have played that position over the last several years. And it brings me to this single point important idea, and the whole reason why I even came up with this episode is the one that separates the people who understand injuries that from the people who just react to them. You can tell the difference between the bad luck. You can tell the difference between a bad luck injury and a pattern. And here's the distinction in my opinion. A contact injury, a bone broken because of a 350-pound player landing on some guy's leg. Um, it's mostly bad luck. Even sometimes if a foot placed in the wrong position and the player is off balance, that can be considered a bad luck injury. It's a freak event in the overall view of things, and it doesn't really tell you much about what's going to happen next season. We're going to take a look at a young back that is very popular in New York. His name is Cam Scatterboo. Cam Scatterboo is a running back out of the University of Miami. He was drafted, I believe, in the late rounds. Very charismatic player, extremely popular in the New York City area, and a great athlete. He transferred from the University of Arizona. I think he went to Arizona State, and he played everything. He was like a Swiss Army knife, and he stuck on as a running back. And he had a breakout season last year, but he went down with a severe traumatic ankle injury, and it was a total dislocation and a fracture of his ankle. It was a brutal injury. If you saw it, it was pretty nasty. But I wouldn't consider that being a reoccurring injury pattern for the New York, and at least the New York Giants fans hope that's really not the case. And the question with an injury like Cam's is what was his recovery like, and will he get an opportunity to play, and will it ever happen again? Nobody really knows. So we can compare that with non-contact injuries like a pulled hamstring when nobody touches the player, an ACL injury where a player steps the wrong way and they tweak their knee and they tear their ACL. Those injuries show up in every training camp, and Sometimes they're freak accidents. Sometimes they're based on the player's ability to prepare and be ready for the abuse and the high intensity uh, play when football starts, especially with the cut down in preparation time during during training camp. A lot of these injuries are really not bad luck. It's the body revealing a possible weak link that could repeat itself during the year. So here's my rule: don't count out the player that has the freak collision or a tackle and they get injured. But be careful of the player who keeps breaking down when nobody's even touching him and they're not available. Players are going to get injured. One thing that's guaranteed, and I know this for a fact, you will be injured playing the game of football, especially after like around week, really shoot, I'd say like week six to between week 6 and 8, everybody's dealing with injuries. Um, it's just a risk that everybody takes, and you got to learn to manage them. Guys like, I believe, like um, uh, I'm sorry, the name escapes me. Like like most players who are able to be resilient, they're able to get the treatment and actually have a plan in place to deal with those injuries, so they don't become reoccurring or they don't affect their availability. Here's why I actually wanted to do this episode about fantasy football. There's a lead into this. Um, I would say everybody that's that's of a certain age, you're the franchise player of pretty much of your own life, and your availability runs on those exact same rules for your career, your family, you're physically active, your training um, regimen, the things that you love to do, like possibly golf, run, obstacle race. Those are the things that make and help you see, and they are the most valuable version of who you are, and not, but it's not the one with the highest. It's not the one that's the most physically active or the best golfer. It's the guy who's able to consistently manage their injuries and manage their those little nicks that happen over the years, and so they're available and they're available consistently over the years. When your body sends you these same signals that I mentioned earlier, you know, with these players, the little tight, it may be like a slight tightness in your hamstring every time you walk or run. That knee that talks to you going up and down the stairs. I have one knee that talks to me every day. Um, the shoulder that's been laid off for a year, my left shoulder has been on and off for like several years. So um, these things can be an annoyance, but the one thing you don't want to do, you don't really want to push through those injuries. It's the exact same soft tissue and over injury patterns that we just talked about with the football players that I recommended you draft for your fantasy football league. And it follows the exact same rule. A previous injury that's ignored sometimes becomes the next injury that takes you out of the game. It's a weak link. It's a weak link that maybe from you being untrained, and that could be the thing that can put you on the PUP list, which is the physically unable to perform list. So the lesson of your durability on your own fantasy draft board is the lesson of health and living a happy and healthy, active life. Availability, I believe, is a skill that we develop over the years. It's the thing that helps us become durable, and it's a trainable skill. It's what you build every day. Being physically active. Being physically active gives you our ability to be, your own assessor is in regards to your mobility, how strong you are, how some areas of your body move, and how quickly you are able to recover from some high intensity, high volume activity that you've been doing, like playing with your kids or running around with your buddies, or playing like 2 or 3 rounds on the golf course. Being physically active can be that main assessment. And one, it's a small signal you want to listen to before it becomes one of the biggest signals that can actually prevent you from maintaining that physical activity. One thing that I would like to cover is, I believe that people that are still playing sports, that are still physically active at the ages of 50 and 60, which is a lot more prevalent these days than when my grandparents were alive. um, they're not the most talented ones. They're the ones who are the most available, and they have a plan in place that allows them to remain physically active, and it gives them the ability to live a life without any kind of physical limitations. So as far as your setup for your fantasy football player lineup, I wish you the best of luck over the next few weeks. Go ahead and choose the player with the most popular um, tagline, the best stats at that position. Have some fun with it, but draft a player with availability draft a player with availability in mind. Take the boring, healthy player, do the research, choose the guy with a history of being available all 17 games, if that's possible. These are the players that win fantasy football championships and win you the pot at the end in December. And it takes the same lesson, you can take that same lesson and apply it to your own lifestyle and to your own body. Protect your availability, listen to your body's signals, stay active, build the durability that you need on a daily basis, and so you can live the life that you want to live. Because the main goal was, in my opinion, for everyone, is never to be possibly try to be the most talented person in the room, but you still want to be the guy standing in the room, healthy, moving, and in the game, and doing what you want to do for a very long time. I'm Coach E. Allen, and this is the Game Ready Podcast. I need you to get ready, stay ready, so you can be ready. I'll see you next week. Take care.